Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Hello, USA Global TV and Radio watchers and listeners. My name is Mariska du Preez, and you are joining us for a Talking Heads episode. So, we have been looking at some of our leadership skills, and today we are looking specifically at decision making. Yep, decision making 101. And I know for most of us, well, we have some practice in decision making. We have done it to some extent from a very early age, hopefully. And for some of us, it is a little bit easier than for others. Now, when we get into the leadership space, decision making can become a little bit more high stakes because, well, there's a few more things that we are responsible for. There are a few more things that might go wrong. And of course, the risks may be a little bit higher than, well, our typical other types of decisions that we are used to making. So what do we do within this space? And this is not only going to help us in our leadership space, it will also help us in our personal space. And the thing that I want to be sharing with you today is a sense-making model. Now, why a sense-making model? To start off with, when we make decisions, typically most of us think that it is very logical. Right? No. We are human beings, and whether we want to admit it or not, the emotional pieces of us are not detachable that we can put into a little tin, then put into a cupboard somewhere and leave it there so that we can make a decision and then come back, take them out and open the tin and put the emotions back. Does not work that way. They stay with us. So they have an influence in the way that we approach decision making. And because of this, we can sometimes be in the wrong place within our sense-making model in order for us to make the appropriate decision for what it is that we are actually working with. And our emotional state might influence this. So being aware of what's going on for us, ourselves, as well as in our environment, makes it a little bit easier for us to then make a decision that feels like it would actually work and that cognitively we have thought out properly. So it's really about bringing our whole human into this space instead of only the head of the human. Because even though we might think we are bringing logic, we are also bringing the rest. So understanding this is a very good first step, especially when going about getting into decision-making situations. Now, what is this sense-making model that I am talking about? The sense-making model that I'm talking about is the Cynefin model. Now, it is a Gaelic word, and the spelling is not quite as easy as you might think. Being Gaelic, of course, these are Y's and I's in places where you typically will not expect them. So what does the sense-making model look at? Well, what the sense-making model looks at is the way that we typically make decisions. And different environments will require different types of decision-making and sense-making. Now, this is a sense-making model because it helps us to determine which environment we are functioning in and in which environment it is that we need to try to make a decision for the thing that we are working on. Now, if we understand our environment, it makes it a lot easier then to make a decision accordingly, and the repercussions will not necessarily be detrimental because we have thought about it, the environment first and not afterwards, or just because we enjoy making decisions in a certain way, that's the only thing that we apply for everything. So no decision making, one size do not fit all. Doesn't work that way either. So within the decision making, we have our part that is around our complicated decisions. Then we have complex decisions, and then we have chaotic types of spaces. So this is sense making for the decisions within those spaces. Now, when we have a complicated space that we want to make decisions in, that is also broken down into two different quadrants. So the one is simple. So it is really where we have a 1 + 1 = 2 sort of equation, right? We know this thing plus that thing or minus that thing will give us this result. In those areas, we have best practice. So we typically know what is best practice within that space. It is something that within the risk and engineering spaces we are quite familiar with. Then we have within our complicated, the more complicated type of decisions that we need to make. And here we have good practice. Now, what is good practice? This is where we have two things that might have different types of outcomes and different variables within the two things that we have that would give us different variables. Experts are typically people that know the good practice within that space, what would work best in these types of scenarios. So the elements that we start to work with are a little bit more, and they're a little bit more diverse, but it's still, we can still take in some time and having some background within the space, we can still sort of predict fairly accurately what the outcome might be of whatever it is that we're working on, or the type of decision that we are making within this space. So in this space, we look at good practice. Now, for most people, those two areas fairly easy to work with. In most spaces, that is also what we typically do. Now, then moving on to the next one, we find the more complex situation. Now, in complexity, especially for our electronic and software engineers, here we have wicked problems. So within the complex system, what happens is we might have we have a wider variety of variables, and our variables vary. So this causes nuances within whatever the thing is that we are trying to get an outcome of. Now, anything within this space, we can think of things such as human beings. We typically know more or less what the human being might do, but they also have free will, and they may not do that. They might do something quite different. So the variable, which is the person, has variables themselves, right? And this also is something that our computer literate engineers have a fun time within their programming, because sometimes there are variables that produces variables. So that's more in the wicked problem sort of category, and it has a lot more complexity around it. Then the very last one is chaos. So what happens with chaos? Well, chaos, and we all on this planet, except if you are very, very little and you were recently born, have gone through the whole COVID pandemic. That would be a chaos situation. There was a stage within the pandemic very early on where we weren't quite too sure what the hell was happening or what exactly the outcomes would be, and there was a chaos system that we were operating within. Now, how does this sense-making model relate to decision-making? Well, it does so in the following ways. If we look at our complicated side and we look at simple, well, we know that 1 + 1 = 2, so we will have our different variables and we have a definite, this is the answer. So as I mentioned earlier, that is really around best practice, right? We know exactly what the best practice is for us to get to whatever it is that we want. So the decision making around that is a lot easier. We need to get the best practice. What is it? Okay, and that's the route that we will then follow. Makes decision making real nice, crisp, and easy and clean. Now, for most people, that is fairly easy to do, and we can fall into the trap of thinking that everything is has a simple solution or is a simple problem, and thus everything where we have 1 + 1, we will have 2. Now, if that is the type of sense making we use on a daily basis for everything that we want to make decisions around, we will definitely fall into traps. The next one is our complicated, where we are looking at experts. So within the complicated system, if we have a decision that we have seen that in our sense-making model, that's really where we're at, we're in complicated, we can speak to any of our experts within that field, and we will get more or less best practice. This is what would make sense. So the variety of answers within that space will be very, very small. Most of the experts will give us more or less the same answer with some nuances to some of the elements. So this is around best practice. And that decision making, then, if we are not the expert, we can get an expert or maybe get 2 experts that can give us some guidance around what exactly it is that we need to do and how to go forward. Nice and easy, also not too difficult or too fussy to get around that. Typically within that space, we also find that most of our fields work within this. So, for instance, engineering, the medical space, most of those things science related would be in those 2 areas. Now, when we're going into the complex situation, yes, engineering and the medical services still work within that space too, but most probably not as often. So within that space, we will need a variety of different experts from a variety of different places. Because in our complex area, what we are looking for is we really want to find out what would be the most appropriate step for us to be taking. So we might have 3 different options, and all 3 of the options, technically speaking, could work. We don't know exactly what the outcome is because it is not in the complicated section, so we can't really relay it. And we need to basically make a decision and then take our next step. So it is really about being able to iterate it and test. So what we want to do is we want to decide on a direction that we want to go into, and then as things unfold and as we get more information, we test it, we reiterate it, we test it, we reiterate it. And that's the way that decision-making works within the complex space. So if you thought that in complex, I'm going to make a decision and it's all done, sorry to burst your bubble, but no, that's not the way it works. Then, next, we have within, that is the complex one. Then we have the chaotic. Now, when we think about chaotic, if that is the space in which we are operating, it's really chaos, right? We don't know what's going on. We really don't have enough information. Everything, there's different moving parts and they're rapidly moving. So we can't see any patterns. There is a lot of things happening all at the same time. So people that typically function within this space is our emergency services guys. And of course, we all did during COVID. So we have some familiarity of what might happen within this space. And in that space, the thing that we want to do is to see what is our safest, best next step. We cannot necessarily see the total outcome of what is going to happen when we make the decision accordingly. We have, in all likelihood, we don't have enough information within that space to really disseminate things, and we don't have time to get it, right? So our information is limited, our time is very rapidly changing, whatever the thing is that's happening within that space. So we need to determine what we think is our best next step. Whether it's the wrong one, doesn't really matter, as long as it gets me out of the fire. And then I can look at the next one. If I am lucky enough and I can move myself into complex by the steps that I take, that's great, because that gives me a little bit more breathing room in order for me now to test my hypothesis. If, however, it does not do that, I need to keep taking this small little steps until I get out of my chaotic situation. So in all likelihood, I'm going to go from chaos to complex. I will not be jumping from chaos to simple. So that's sort of the way that when we are in specific situations, how they might pan out. What might happen, though, is when we have our system that we have and we are making sense of it and we think we are in simple, because, I don't know, our organization is a couple of 100 years old. We have been through everything. We have seen everything. And all of a sudden, COVID happens. We go, there's a in the diagram or in the sense-making model, there's literally a cliff between simple and chaotic. And the reason for the cliff is that if we are in simple and we move and we think we are still in simple, but we're getting very close to this edge, we will literally drop ourselves into chaos. because what we think was a simple solution might have been a complex one. Because the decision making we used in our simple sense making was the wrong type of decision making, it throws us into chaos. So this might happen for a variety of reasons. It might be external factors, there might be internal factors to the organization or to our own team. So really making sure, and that's why this sense-making model is so important, is making sure we understand exactly where it is that we are sitting in order for us to make sense of what's going on around us and what type of decisions and approach we need to make in order to get us out of whatever the situation is that we are in. So taking note of the fact that simple can move into chaos if we have wrongly identified where we are. So making a note of that, that's a very important thing to take into consideration. So while we are making sense of what exactly is happening in this space, being very aware of whether there is best practice for the thing that we're going into. If there's not a best practice for it, we will most probably, if we make a decision within that space, throw ourselves into chaos, and that's not what we want. So we need to then go and have a look whether it is good practice, or do we need to test our hypothesis out in order to find what the solution would be to this specific problem, and what would be the best decision then accordingly. So this sense-making model, I'm hoping, will give you a good idea and work around how you then make decisions within your team and within your space. Now, as I mentioned previously, certain fields or certain occupations might be prone to utilize some of these sense-making spaces more than others. If that is the case in your space, it is a good thing to be aware of, and to also bring in the other voices that might have other ways of looking at the same problem. So if I am typically operating in a complicated space, whether simple or complicated, and I do not typically work in a chaos space, it would be good to get people that work in a chaos space more often to come and look at what we do. It is a little bit of that diversity and inclusion of thinking, the way that we think and the way that we look at things, bringing that into our space to ensure that we have a richer discussion that helps us with better decision making. And as I mentioned, of course, we are all human beings, and yes, during decision making, especially when it is tough decisions, there's most likely going to be a whole variety of emotions that come up. So also being aware of what those emotions might be and how they might impact the decision we make and the sense we are making of where exactly it is that we are within this space. So that, I'm hoping, gives you a great idea of some decision making one-on-one that you can be doing either with your team or just at home with a family in general in life. So with all of that, I look forward to seeing you guys next time. And of course, if you want to get hold of me, whether you are a specialist moving into leadership or a leader moving up into your leadership career, and you would like to have some more discussions around decision making or anything else within your transition space, please contact me via my email, which is mariska@journey2discover.com, or alternatively, let me know on LinkedIn and we can connect and start our conversation. Until next time, enjoy.